All right, I'm in the Gospel of John, John chapter 6. In this message, I'll be spending time between verses 33 and I'm going to make my way all the way down to verse 59. So there is a lot of content to address in these verses if I'm really going to try to cover that much ground. But I'm going to try to do that and work through some of this stuff. This has to do with the conversation. This is the conversation that Jesus was having with the people who he fed on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, the feeding of the 5,000. And this is a follow-up conversation that they are having with Jesus because they track him down, they find him, and so there has to be a decision concerning the kind of relationship that is going to exist between Jesus and these people. Right? So I'm going to start with that a little bit, and then I'll work my way back up to maybe verse 28 or so and work my way down. But let's start with that and to understand that this is a conversation about a relationship. What kind of relationship will exist between Jesus and these people? All right? And what I want you to consider, which very few people seem to pay attention to, is that God gets to be a part of the decision of what kind of a relationship that he is willing to have with somebody else. In fact, it's a major part. If he doesn't agree with the kind of relationship that people are wanting him to have, then he isn't going to participate. Now, what I think is the most important to think about, just for a moment before I review some things and get into these passages, is that if you want to have a genuine and true relationship with your God, then you're going to have one that he is willing to have. You may find that you don't really have much of a relationship with God. And if that's the case, then this could be one of the reasons why, or maybe a percentage, small percentage, or a big percentage, as to why that may not be the case. Because you might want to have a certain kind of relationship with him that he's not willing to have. All right? Or you may think that you have a relationship with him when in reality you don't. And what you have is really something about your own personal fantasy that you live in, which can go a long way in some cases, but there's a big difference between living in fantasy and living in reality. All right? Now, what I would like to include with this is that even if a person pursues the Lord and pursues a relationship with him that is based on fantasy, that is not real, at least it's something, all right? At least it's something, and at least a person is moving in a good direction, and that maybe one day, perhaps not now, but maybe years down the road, years later, a person might consider, gosh, I feel further away from the Lord than when I first got saved, or I can tell that the relationship I have with him just seems to be relatively weak. There may be the presence and the existence of some kind of relationship, and yet there are serious limitations because of the things that you believe. And that these are things that may need to be reevaluated. All right? And so I'm speaking about these things as aggressively as I am in some cases because I am interested in you having a genuine relationship with the Lord. Now, if you disagree with me, of course, you're free to do that, you're free to do that. And I can provide you with something good, even though you disagree with me. I can provide you with something to think about, something to evaluate, something to consider. When I talk about how the people were relating to Jesus, you might disagree with what I mean by that. And that is good, all right? That's good. There's nothing wrong with that because at least you're considering that there is another point of view and that you may disagree with it, but you understand what that other point of view is. And maybe one day it will become a little bit more clear that maybe I'm right, maybe that'll be the case. Maybe not, all right? But the point is that at least I'm presenting something that could be of value, if not now, at least perhaps in the future. All right? So I think it's important, all right? I think it's important to consider that what I am describing about this conversation and about this attempted relationship that people are wanting to have with him, I think it's important to consider what I have been describing concerning this, because there could be, if not total truth concerning what I'm saying, there may be partial truths present. For example, when I talk about the people being manipulative, right? Or even some people wanting to seize Jesus and make him king by force. Well, look, there were 20,000 people there approximately, maybe 15 to 20,000 people. Did all of them feel like they were wanting to be manipulative towards Jesus? I would not think so, all right? I wouldn't want to say that, but I can speak in terms of the majority. I can do that with conviction. But, I have to allow for the consideration that there were probably some people that would not be wanting to seize him by force and make him king. That there may have been some people who were not really wanting to put themselves into a desperate situation, such as we're hungry and there's no food for us to eat. There were a lot of people who intentionally put themselves into that situation, but it doesn't mean that everybody was doing that. We have to consider those things, and I'm perfectly open to that. But considering what I think is abundantly obvious, considering the point of view that I have been presenting, if I'm correct, then this is an opportunity to understand a lot about the character of your God and what he is willing to do, what he's not willing to do, how he will relate to people, how he won't relate to people. All right? You got to remember that this is another person. He's not just some idea. He's not a study, a theology in the sense of the study of God, and that, it's just some kind of abstract study. This is a genuine person. All right? Let me move ahead just a little bit and show you where I'm going. I won't get into this verse in too much detail, probably in this message. In the next one, I might address it a little bit more. But in verse 66, all right, let me just show you a little bit ahead to see where it is that I'm going. In John chapter 6, verse 66, it says, "From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. Then Jesus said to the 12, 'Do you also want to go?' But Simon Peter answered him, 'Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Also we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God.'" In verse 66, there were many of his disciples who went back and walked with him no more. All right? They walked with him no more. Why did they walk with him no more? I think it's an important question to really ask. Why did they reject Jesus and yet others accepted him? If you don't answer this question well, then you could very well be the kind of person who either is not walking with Jesus or would not walk with Jesus. Or, this is the issue. You might be walking with a Jesus who isn't the real Jesus. He's a Jesus that you want, or out of the figment of your imagination, or whatever. You may not realize that. And so when you start to discover some things that he has to say, then and you don't want to accept those things, or you don't want to consider those things, then it might be an indicator that you have to review who is the Jesus that you have a relationship with. And so there are people who may just reject Jesus entirely. But there are other people who might indirectly reject him because they say they believe in Jesus, but they really don't. Not the real one. They have another one that they believe in. All right? Let's consider what I was saying earlier about these people, that they were being manipulative and that they were after Jesus with this problem-solving technique that they had. And the problem-solving technique had to do with forcing him to be made king. That was a problem-solving technique, that they would force him to be in a situation, to force him to be in charge, to force him to do what they want him to do. Some would be willing to do that. The other problem-solving technique had to do with the fact that they put themselves in a situation where they were hungry, that they did not bring food with them when they went to go visit Jesus while he was on vacation. All right? And, they knew they were out there in the middle of nowhere. They intentionally put themselves in this circumstance. And this is a problem-solving technique. A problem-solving technique of the problem that needs to be solved is, how do you feed yourself? How do you feed yourself or your children or others who depend on you? How do you do that? Well, a problem-solving technique is to find a nice person, all right, a godly person, and make yourself hungry because you don't do, the work involved to be a participant in the production and the provision of food or other things in order to help somebody to do that, to fulfill that role in the relationship that you might have. And then, because of the situation of being so desperate, now the other person has to do this for you. Otherwise, you will exercise extortion, in the sense that you had better do it, or I will do bad things to you. I will call you bad names. I will call your friends, that kind of thing. You will do what I say, and you will comply, or I will hurt you. Or once you fail, now I can use blackmail and say, look, you have done this. I'm going to give you one more chance. You'd better, I'm hungry and you didn't feed me, and you have to do that. I declare you have to be responsible for that. And so you have violated me. You either fix this or I will then find ways of hurting you. All right. And, this is what I see happening between the people and Jesus. You may not see that this is happening, and that's okay. Don't worry. I'm almost out of this chapter. Okay, I'm still talking about it because it has to do with the conversation. All right, and I'm still in the conversation. There's still things to talk about, and there's still the continual pressure from the people. All right, why? Because it doesn't cost them anything. All right, but I want you to consider something else. That if you don't agree with the way that I'm describing these people, a good possibility is that this is exactly what you do, all right? This is exactly how you relate to other people, and you may not like the idea that this could be exposing the way that you solve problems of life, all right? That could very well be the case, and I know that might be quite abrupt and maybe rude, and if there's other people around you, they might be, thinking, well, maybe he's got a point, and maybe that's the case. I'm not saying that for the purpose of making you feel condemned. I'm saying that for the purpose of making you more honest, okay? And for you to give you an opportunity to be more honest. Chances are, certainly not everybody's like this. If you don't believe what I'm saying, it doesn't mean that you're automatically one of these people. It doesn't mean that at all right? It just means, from my experience, there is enough of a percentage, a high enough percentage of people who will reject this kind of explanation. The percentage is high enough that it's perfectly acceptable for me to mention it, that there are people who will reject this kind of description because they don't want their own problem-solving techniques to be exposed as being the same. All right? And, I've had more than enough experience with people to understand that this is quite likely the case. So this is an opportunity to maybe be a little bit more honest, to maybe make some adjustments. And if you don't think that that's what's happening here, and you still want to protest, I'm sure you could at least agree that maybe that's not what's happening in this situation, but it does happen in other situations of life. You would at least perhaps agree with that. And if you won't even agree with that, then I think we have a clear indicator that this is what you do, and this is something that concerns you, that perhaps I might be exposing the way that you relate to people. But you know what? If you don't embrace this, okay, if you don't get in touch with this, then chances are this is how you relate to your God. This is how you relate to Jesus. And you may not want to admit it either, but that could very well be the case. And so I'm mentioning this because I am concerned, all right? Because I am concerned, and I want you to have a healthy, true, genuine relationship with a God who has his own ideas concerning what that relationship should be like. Now, again, if people get started in this direction, at least they get started, and eventually corrections like this can be made, and people can be encouraged to have an improvement in the relationship that they have with the Lord, right? And so these are all good things. Okay, so I wanted to address that. All right, let me go back up to verse 28. Okay, in verse 28, then they said to him, "What shall we do that we may work the works of God?" Talking about food, they said, "Hey, look, we want some food." They traveled from that deserted place, right? And by this time, they're starting to get hungry. And instead of going to work and doing productive things in order to produce food for themselves, they hunt Jesus down. Okay, they go and they hunt him down, and they get to him. Now, he does not provide them with any more food, but they persist in the conversation. And that's why I'm still here and why I'm still talking about this, because they continue to persist in the conversation. And you might wonder, why is it that they are so persistent? And the answer is not hard, all right? The answer would be because it doesn't cost them anything. It doesn't cost them anything to persist. It doesn't cost them anything to keep the conversation going with Jesus. In fact, this is a childish problem-solving technique of you pester someone. All right, you pester them until they finally give in and do what you want just to get rid of you, just to get you to stop bothering them, or to get you out of their way and so that they can go and do something they want to do. All right, that is a very childish problem-solving technique. And that, again, that's what I see, is that there is this continuation of this. And I want you to understand, it doesn't really cost them anything. And it increases their opportunity to exercise extortion and blackmail the hungrier they get. But they do walk away. They turn away hungry. Yes, they do. They turn away hungry. Jesus does not feed them. And so once this is over, then they experience the cost, because they will have wasted a lot of their time, a lot of their effort, and they got nothing in return. So that is when they bear the cost. And that's partially why they will continue to be so aggressively persistent as far as they can possibly go, because if they stop, then they have to bear the cost. So they keep the pressure, they keep the abusive communication, which is really what this is. They keep that up, even though Jesus is very polite, very kind, very patient with them, relatively speaking. They keep it up because the more they do it, the greater the cost it will be to them if they stop. Because then they realize they wasted their time. And they still have the problem of they're hungry. They have to go find food somehow. All right? So this is the nature of the relationship. Now, Jesus has already walked away from them. All right? I've taken a very strong position that Jesus walked on water to get away from them. All right? He walked on water to get away from these people, and it still didn't work. So now what you're going to see, especially as I described in verse 66, is that he's going to communicate with these people in a way that they will walk away from him. All right? He tried to walk away from them, and they would not allow that. They followed him across the sea. You know, they took a different route because they couldn't walk on water, but they followed him across the sea. They are not going to let him get away. Don't let him escape. Don't let him exit the relationship that they wanted to impose on him. So now the only option is for him to pressure the issue in order to get them to walk away. All right? And it's really not that difficult. You just make sure you don't provide. You don't provide those things that a person wants for their flesh. You stop providing for their flesh and they will walk away. All right? Because they either will have to go produce for themselves or go find a new victim. You know, and that's what people do. So he will have to communicate with them in a way that they will walk away. So he was assertive about the kind of relationship that he was willing to offer. He was assertive. He said, this is what I'm willing to do. This is who I am. This is what I have to offer. And if you want to accept that, then a relationship can be established on those terms, on God's terms, but not on yours. All right? And I want you to understand that you have a God who feels this way, who thinks this way, that it really is important to him, that his terms, his conditions, the kind of relationship that he wants to have with people, that he's willing to have with people, that, you know, what he thinks really is important. And you really had better pay attention to what he has had to say so that you can have an increase in an understanding of him as a person. All right? And I've given you an example about how some people will relate to others here on this earth in terms of their extortion and blackmail and how they manipulate others or exercise different forms of force. All right? You know, there are people like that. And they will want to impose that on God, and God will have no part of it at all. And for him, it's easy to walk away. All right? Because now he exists and functions in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual dimension. He's not physically available. You cannot confront him and ruin his day. You can't stop him from doing what he wants to do. You cannot get him to listen to you if he doesn't want to. All right? He functions in the spiritual dimension, which provides him with absolute protection from people like this. All right? And so, you know, he's doing great. He's doing just fine. If you want to have a connection with him, a genuine one as a person, it really has to be on his terms. Or, you know, he isn't available, and you cannot manipulate or force him in any way whatsoever. Now, when they were saying this in verse 28, then they said to him, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? I described this in a certain context, that they were saying, you know, they were saying indirectly, look, you know, we clearly cannot do the works of God. We're not God. You are. You can do the works of God, so you do your part. We'll do our part. We'll eat the bread. We can do that. But you can produce the bread, so you do that. You know, to each according to his ability and to each according to his need. All right? That's what they're talking about. Now, there could be, you know, a different attitude that they may have. There is the possibility that there were people who genuinely wanted to do miracles. I personally feel that that percentage would be very small. Okay, I do, but I'm not willing to say that they did not exist. All right, in being a part of asking this question, I would say that the percentage is just so small that it's not necessarily worth considering too much that there were people who genuinely wanted to do the works of God. Now, today, within the Christian world, we can find a lot of people who genuinely want to do the works of God. And this is a common conversation that I have with people, that they really do. They really do want to do the works of God. They want to be a part of the works of God. And the conversation usually leads to a life under the law in some respect, or a form of the law, where we're going to talk about what are good things. What are the good things that we can do, the right things that we can do, and what are the evil things that we should not be doing? And it becomes a life of living by what is good and by doing what is good and not doing what is evil. It becomes another system of works according to a system or a form of religious law. And that's where this conversation often comes up. And so I can refer them to this verse and use this, or I can use this as an answer by pointing out what Jesus said in verse 29. Jesus answered and said to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent." Now, when Jesus was talking to these people, this is the work, that you believe in him, that you trust in him, that you rely on him. I have the conviction that when he said this to these people, he's just talking about the gospel. He's proclaiming the good news of salvation, of eternal life, of the restoration of the Holy Spirit, that he is the Messiah that is going to solve these problems, the problem of sin and spiritual death. I personally feel that that is his direct intent. But there is another truth that he may not have intended to say at this time that we know is true, and the same words would represent that, and that this has to do with us living by the inheritance that we have in Christ. And I think it's reasonable to suggest this because he goes on and he speaks a little bit about the will of God after this. So I don't feel shy about turning people to this verse in this context. When people are wanting to do the works of God, I say, if you want to do the works of God, if you want to work for God, if you want to do the work of the ministry, those kinds of things, the place to focus on, the place to start and the place to focus on is to focus on your belief and trust in Jesus, which can be represented not just in the context of salvation, but after that, it has to do with your inheritance that you have in Christ Jesus. As an example, you have the love of God. You have the acceptance of God. You have the wisdom of God. These are things that he gives to you, and he describes it as the giving of an inheritance, which is described in a will. The will of God is the description of the inheritance that you have in Christ Jesus. And so if you will believe and trust in these finer points, in these more specifics related to the package deal of having Jesus in you, it's a package deal. And if you'll unwrap it a little bit and identify some of the specifics, some of the things that are contained within this package, and as you trust in and rely on and believe on these smaller things, then it will have a dramatic impact in who you are. It will fulfill deep needs that you have within your being, within your heart, and there will be greater opportunities for God to make use of you, greater opportunities because you have grown and matured in what you have in Christ Jesus. And so when the works of God are prepared and they are realized, because we have a God who prepares works for us to walk in, and there are also works that he needs people to go and do, and he will find people to participate in those things as they show up, all right? And so he prepares people, and he will also recruit people. He will call upon people in order to fulfill needs. And as a person believes in him, they are more capable of being a participant in the works of God. What do we do that we may do the works of God? What do we do that we may be participants in the work of God? Stay focused. Stay focused on your inheritance in Christ and grow in your knowledge and understanding of what you have and how, through your experiences of life, how you can apply those things that you already have in Christ in your daily experiences that can become an integral part of the decisions that you make. This is a lifelong experience. And this is one of the ways, all right? This is one of the ways that a verse like this can be interpreted, even though I'm pretty sure that this was not the direct intent of Jesus. It is a truth, all right? It is a truth, and I can often use this verse in order to help people to begin to grasp it. Moving forward into verse 30. Therefore, they said to him, all right, so this is the continuation of the conversation. Therefore, they said to him, what sign will you perform then that we may see it and believe you? All right, this is another provocation. They are provoking him. He's already shown an abundance of signs. How many does he have to do? That's the point. It doesn't matter how many he does. It's not the signs. They don't really want the sign. They want him to give them some food. They're hungry. Feed their stomach. All right, put some food in their stomach. Their God is their stomach in a sense. Okay, that we may believe you. They go on and they say, we'll give you an example if you're not sure what to do. What work will you do? Verse 31, our fathers ate the manna in the desert. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. All right, so there you go. It's a manipulation. It's a provocation. To provoke someone is a form of manipulation. Okay, we call this provoking speech. All right, I'm pretty sure that this is listed somewhere in the letters of Paul, where he listed this as one of the sins that he wanted to discourage people from being engaged in. Provoking speech, all right? It's a form of manipulation. It is dishonesty. It is an exercise of dishonesty. And they are attempting to provoke him, all right? Provoke him in the same context. Give us the bread from the desert. Come on, let's get it going. Let's start over. Let's make this work. Things didn't work out so well when the children of Israel, when their forefathers entered into the promised land. But don't worry, we're still not quite into the majority of the religious territory in Israel. We're still on the outskirts. Capernaum is far enough away. Don't worry. We're still kind of on the outskirts. You can give us bread from heaven. We'll say it's the same kind of a scenario. We'll make you the king. We'll be your army, and we'll invade. We'll invade the land, and we'll conquer Israel. You will be the messianic king. That's the manipulation. That's the provocation. And Jesus is saying, no, I am not going to do it that way. I'm not going to do it that way. That's effectively what he's letting them know. He tells them that he is there for another purpose, for another reason. And he is going to offer them the opportunity to have a relationship with him according to this purpose, according to this reason. But that's not what they want. And they walk away. So folks, if they don't embrace what he is offering, isn't it obvious that they had something else in mind? So if you don't like my explanation, you come up with one. All right? And that's fine. You get one. Good. That's good, right? At least it's close. Okay? There's got to be some explanation as to what was wrong with these people, right? Wrong with their perspective, wrong with their beliefs. There's got to be something. Moving forward into verse 32, then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Well, they could look at that and say, well, I don't know. I mean, they clearly had some bread from heaven. Okay, what Jesus is telling them is that, all right, sure, there was manna from heaven. There was bread. I understand that. That's fine. Okay, but that was symbolic. That was symbolic of something else, and today is the something else. So that today we could use that as an example in order to speak of the bread from heaven that he really wants to give, that he is going to give, and that's all you're going to get. That's all they got. All they got is the offer of the true bread from heaven. They're not going to get the bread that they want, but they can get the one that he's offering. They don't take it, but that's what Jesus is offering. All right, the bread, verse 33, for the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Then they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. Oh, really? Oh, really? Yeah, give us this bread always. Well, he offers it, and they don't take it. All right? They don't take it. They walk away. Don't you see they walk away? This is not an honest conversation. Give us this bread always. No. They are still thinking about, give me something I can put in my stomach, not in my soul, not in my spirit. All right? Because they walk away. He says, well, okay, I'll give it to you, but then they walk away. They don't take it. Give us this bread always. Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. Okay. Verse 35. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. All right. Now this is very profound. All right. Now I look at this from a perspective that's a little bit different from most, and so try to bear with me. This may be a little new for you. But when he officially declares, I am the bread, all right, that is a very profound statement, especially considering what has happened previously. And I'll tell you why. This is what I saw. When I first saw this, I thought, wow, this is really profound. For him to say that he is the bread, there are some very serious implications to what he just said. Because if you go back in this chapter, go back to verse 11. And I mentioned that I would come back to this later, and this is the time. In verse 11, chapter 6, verse 11, and Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples. He had given thanks. All right? Now, when he gave thanks, how would he give thanks? There is a traditional way of giving thanks. And I think the probability is quite high that he used the traditional way of giving thanks. Now, maybe he didn't. But this was what was impactful to me, all right? And so I'm going to share with you something that I find, and I feel that the probability is very high that this is correct. If it's not, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But I wanted to share this with you. In verse 11, he gave thanks. Okay, and there was a way, and it still is, a way of giving thanks. This is also repeated again in verse 23. In verse 23, and it says, and I've lost my place, there it is. However, other boats came from Tiberias near the place where they ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. Okay, so, when I saw this early on in my early years of being in the faith, he gave thanks in verse 11. It's mentioned again in verse 23. He gave thanks. I thought, there's something to that. And then sure enough, when I made it over here to this verse, in verse 35, where he says, I am the bread of life, I made a certain connection, okay? Because there was a way of giving thanks. There's a prayer that was said back at this time, before this time, and is still said today. Every time you give thanks especially for bread. The blessing is, it's a blessing that has been, officially recognized as this is the official blessing. Blessed be the Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth the bread from the earth. And I'll take a moment and speak in tongues. That's the interpretation first, and the actual language is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. And there's a tune that goes along with that as well. There's an ancient one, and then there's a new modern one that I've been hearing people use. I prefer the ancient one. Maybe someday I'll present that. But the translation is, blessed be the Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth the bread from the earth. All right? And what I discovered was that Jesus was brought forth from the earth. He is the bread who is brought forth from the earth. He was crucified. He was put in the tomb. He was there for 3 days in the earth, and God brought him forth. All right? And so this was the connection that I personally made with what I found here in John chapter 6 that was very meaningful to me. And so I at least wanted to share that with you concerning this, that he states that he is the bread. All right? Now, as you can see, or you should be able to see at this point, that there, if you don't, you'll see it soon. You should see that Jesus is asserting to them he's not going to feed them. He's not going to do it. He will provide them with salvation, and he will provide them with a relationship according to the new covenant. He will do that. He will provide them with everlasting life. He'll do that, but he's not going to feed them. All right? That's very interesting, isn't it? That you have a God who will give you what you need, spiritually speaking, but he's not necessarily going to always give you what you need physically. Not necessarily. All right? And here's an example that, it could very well be the case. You do not have a claim on God that he has to supply your flesh with all your flesh desires. You have no claim. He has no obligation to do so. He may do so, and that's good, but he has no obligation. What he has promised is what you need in your spirit. All right, so you can see that they're just simply not going to go for this. All right, they're not going to accept what he is offering. So what he is going to do is he could tell there's no way to bridge the gap between himself and these people. So what he's going to do is he's going to make the gap as wide as possible. That's what he's going to do. And sometimes this has to be done in relationships that we have with each other, with other people, that if there's a gap between us that is just too much of an issue that prevents us from really having a healthy relationship, much of any kind, then there may be a need in order to make that gap as clear and as obvious and as concise, and maybe make it as wide as possible in order to encourage somebody to walk away. This is what Jesus does. Okay, so continuing, I'm going to say again in verse 35, and Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. All right, everyone who the Father has given to him. Now, who are these people? Is there just some group of people that the Father has given to Jesus and some group of people that he didn't? How do you know if you're one or the other, right? And this is a popular doctrine, all right? A lot of people in the Christian world, historically even, take the position that God has decided that some of these people that he has created, they are going to be given to Jesus and others are not. All right? The way that I perceive this, I personally think that has to do with pagan Greek philosophy. All right? And a lot of people have asked me more about the idea of pagan Greek philosophy and how that's used in order to interpret the scriptures. In order for me to effectively do that, you have to study pagan Greek philosophy, which I have done. You have to study the works of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. You have to study them. And I don't foresee at the moment doing a lecture series on Greek philosophy. I don't have that on my agenda, okay, at the moment. So it's something that you just have to look into it for yourself. And so I can tell you the direction to look into and to see. But that is a position that is expressed through the pagan philosophy of the Greeks, and that has been carried over through Roman Catholicism, through Augustine, and then we have Calvin who brought that in, who's just simply the Protestant version of Augustine. He said that himself, all right, in effect. And so we have a lot of people who believe this kind of thing. I don't believe that at all. I genuinely believe that God has defined all people, but he has established the criteria through which he is willing to have a relationship. So he has defined all people, and in a sense, everyone has been given to Jesus, in a sense. Everyone has been given to him in the sense that everyone has an opportunity to have a relationship with him. But because of the criteria that he has defined, as an example, he's not going to be the Messiah who just feeds your stomach. He's the Messiah who will feed your spirit and your soul. That's the kind of relationship he's willing to have. So of those people who decide that they would like to have the spiritual relationship with him and not this physical one based on getting bread from heaven, for those who decide that that's the kind of relationship they want, those are the ones who are in effect given to Jesus. They're given to him because they decide that they will meet the criteria. That may feel counterintuitive, and it may feel like it's contradictory, but I'll tell you that the reason why most people struggle with that is because they have a bias that was defined by Greek philosophy that has been used in order to interpret the Bible from the majority of folks. And so if you don't agree with me on that, then, of course, you're free to do so, but I have to state what I personally see here in this context and in this message, and so that's what I do. All right, and so continuing on into verse 38. Verse 38, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day." Okay, now this usage of the word will can be seen in two different contexts. One is the desire of God. It is the desire of God, and we can put that in here and read it from that perspective. "This is the desire of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day." So from the point of view of the desire of God, you could also say it from the perspective of the description of the inheritance. "This is the description of the inheritance of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day." All right, the description of the inheritance of all that God has given Jesus as a result of his death. There is something that could be said about that. I'm just going to mention it, and I'm not going to present a formal message on that in this series, okay? But I will mention it as something for you to think about, something for you to consider, and something to explore on your own. All right, but I'll move forward for the sake of time and for the consideration of where I'm at. "This is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day." I'm going to, at this time, just emphasize the fact that he's talking about salvation. All right, in verse 40, "And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day." Okay, so while we could say a lot more about the significance and the implications of what he says about the will of God as a description of an inheritance, at the moment his usage is mainly with relationship to just being saved, everlasting life, having the life of God dwelling within you in a way that it will never depart. Verse 41, the Jews then complained about him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. Then they said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he says, I have come down from heaven? Jesus therefore answered and said to them, but before he answers, I want you to see the relationship between verse 34, where he says, then they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. And then in verse 41, the Jews then complained about him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. Give us this bread always. Remember I said, yeah, right. Well, here you go. Okay, you just have to wait a little while and you'll see it really is, a false pretense. It's a false statement. They're going to complain. All right? And of course they're going to start to complain. They're getting hungrier. All right? Have a lot to complain about. Verse 42, and they said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it that he says, I have come down from heaven? Jesus therefore answered and said to them, do not murmur among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. Who is drawn? Everyone is drawn. These people are drawn. Okay? Everyone is drawn. But everyone also has to decide to accept or reject the offer that God makes. All right? So the call goes out to the world. God calls out to the world. This is the gospel. This is the opportunity for salvation, things like that. Everyone is drawn to God at some point, in some way in their life, and then they make a decision to accept what he has to offer or to reject what he has to offer. In this case, these people reject what he has to offer. So they may be drawn, and they may be drawn by God, all right, but not for the reasons for which God is willing to have a relationship with them. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. Again, everyone is drawn, and everyone will come, but only those who will do so for the right reasons will stay and be saved. Verse 45, it is written in the prophets, and they shall be taught by God. Therefore, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. All right? So earlier on in here, he states that in verse 45, and they shall be taught by God. Therefore, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. All right? As long as a person will pursue and study and discover what God has had to say already, then they will be directed for the right reasons to the right person for the right relationship that God is willing to have with them. And so regardless of where a person is at, as long as they will pursue that, they decide, as long as a person will decide to learn from God, to learn from what he has made available, then they will be moved in this direction. All right? In which case, they will then have to decide if they're going to embrace or reject the truth that is revealed. But at the end here, all right, at the end is where he makes the statement that will cause them to either This is a confrontation. It will cause them to either accept what he's willing to offer, or they're going to have to walk away. That's what he does. Again, at the end of verse 51, and the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. Oh, that's a big one. Verse 52. The Jews therefore quarreled among themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? All right? He cannot bridge the gap with these people. So he's going to make it as wide as possible, and they're going to walk away. All right? They won't leave him alone. He tried to walk away, so now he's going to get them to walk away. They really want to, have something to do with him. This is what he's going to give them. In verse 53, then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him, as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers ate the manna, and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever. These things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. All right? He's saying, look, the bread you're asking for, if you eat that, you're going to die. But if you eat the bread that I am offering, then you will live forever. He's obviously speaking symbolically. You have the Catholics who say, well, we're going to make it real. No, that doesn't. You can do whatever rituals you want and claim whatever you want, and that is not reality. That's total fantasy. But he is speaking symbolically. He is speaking symbolically about what he's going to do so that we can be saved eternally. And he says it in a way. He says it in a way that most of the people are going to walk away. All right? Most of the people are going to walk away. Those who remain are those who really want to know what he means by that. Who really want to know. Who really want to understand. Who really want to have a true and genuine relationship with him. Who are willing to wait until they understand what the terms of the relationship will be, till they understand what Jesus is willing to have with them, because that's what they want. They want something true and genuine with their God. In verse 60, therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a hard saying, who can understand it? When Jesus knew in himself that his disciples complained about this, he said to them, does this offend you? He goes on, and I'll talk about this in the next message. But what I wanted to show you, especially from verse 66, keep going to verse 66, from that time many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. All right? And to him, that was acceptable. Okay? To him, that's acceptable. Go ahead. Walk away. Walk away. If you are not willing to surrender to the kind of relationship that your God is willing to have with you, then as far as he's concerned, you can just walk away. That's the kind of God you have. The kind of relationship that he's willing to have with you is good. It is true. It is eternal. It is perfect. And so, why should he be shy about this? Why should he be concerned about people walking away? All right? But that's the decision that most people make. Most people make that decision to just walk away. All right, so I got a question for you. For those of you who are using this for your small groups, the question is that I came up with is to describe some circumstances when you found it was better to make a clear separation between yourself and others than trying to maintain a relationship of faith. In other words, there have been some times when you have separated from others. Your relationship has ended. Okay, maybe not completely, maybe just half of it or 80% of it or something, which is fine, which is good, right? But what were some of the topics that were present that caused that kind of separation? All right, I think it's good. I think it's good to think about those things, talk with each other about these things, because in the future, you're quite likely going to watch people try to have relationships with each other, and knowing that they're eventually going to separate because of these particular topics. Or you may be able to understand better as to why some relationships kind of ended or were significantly reduced. I think it's important to consider what were some of these things that came up that there was no way to make an agreement on, but instead there was just simply an exaggeration in order to make it clear that there would be no fellowship on the basis of those particular topics. It's an issue in life. It's something that we have to wrestle with. It's something that we have to struggle with. But in the midst of these things, we still need to try to do the best that we can. The best that we can to maintain the quality of relationships that we are able to have and to enjoy those, and to just simply understand that between each other, we're never really going to have the kind of perfection that we probably would like to have. But that with our God, individually, there will always be an increase. There's always an opportunity for an increase in relationship. Whereas with each other, there can be opportunities for decreases as well as increases. And to just understand that that's part of the struggle that we are in this world, and does have its value in many ways as we increase in our understanding of who our God is and how he relates to us and how we are able to relate to him and how we can be a participant in his life and how we may do the works of God. Okay? Thank you.